Welcome, friends. This is another episode of the Barricades podcast. As usual, we are bringing you a fresh portion of analysis and comments on the most striking political events and processes around Eastern Europe. On today's show, we're going to continue to discuss the outcome of the local elections that were held in Romania about 2 weeks ago. It turns out that apart from the results for the various parties, virtually all of them right wing, there are other truly hair raising statistics. For example, what is the percentage of sex offenders among the newly elected mayors? There are also national, ethnic, and socio-cultural aspects of that past unnoticed. Yet they seem to be pretty symbolic of the general decadence that the Romanian society has to endure. The keyword here seems to be self-humiliation. Why do Romanians like to elect German or French citizens as leaders of local governments, but demonstrate contempt for the Roma population, hatred towards Russians, and silly conceit towards many other nations in Eastern Europe? We're also going to talk about recent events in Bulgaria, the ongoing daily protests against the right-wing government of Boyko Borisov, and the corrupt oligarchic core that has been developing and strengthening in this country for the last 3 decades. While the Bulgarian people are taking to the streets in numbers and have been protesting for nearly 90 days in a row, the European Union is preoccupied with Belarus, which is not its member. Yet in Bulgaria, people demonstrate for very similar reasons: an authoritarian gangster at the top, ruining the country and the society, and virtually no opposition media. Bulgaria is one of the countries of the former Eastern Bloc where capitalist restoration has brought the most catastrophic results. A third of the entire population has emigrated so far, the infrastructure is falling apart, industry has ceased to exist, agriculture is fully controlled by a handful of families, and illiteracy is booming among the Roma population. What is the way forward? Is there one? So, Maria, let's dive straight in. What about the elections, the local elections in Romania? It's been like 2 weeks since they were held. And the question is whether we can actually learn anything new after 2 weeks from the moment they took place. Is there anything still left uncovered, unexplained, and you feel it yet deserves public attention?
Of course. Unfortunately, only a couple of feminists here in Romania discussed the fact that we have three sex offenders that got elected as mayors in Romania. And what is more troubling is the fact that the press wrote extensively, and the mainstream press wrote about these individuals, and their stories are horrific. I will tell you all about it. So, but let me start with an observation. Even though the press talked about how they were sex offenders and described what they did, nobody in the mainstream press took the time to debate, to organize a debate around the fact that people voted for those individuals that the mainstream press wrote about and described them as sex offenders. This seems to be ignored by the mainstream press, and this comes in the context when our parliamentary parties here in Romania forged an alliance, as I told you many times, to banish all sorts of discussions about gender in Romanian educational institutions. So you can see here how things are related. I mean, according to our politicians, we will be no longer allowed to discuss about gender inequality, gender-based violence. And at the same time, we are not discussing the elephant in the room. How was it possible that in three different parts of our country, sex offenders were elected as mayors? And let me tell you about these three individuals. Because their offenses were not something to be easily, explained. For instance, Damian Budnariu He's the mayor of a small town, Mogoeș Siret. Um, Actually had sexual intercourse with two teenage girls that were trafficked. And we learned about it because he was a witness in an investigation, and he had to give a statement before a judge. And this is where he admitted the fact that he had sexual intercourse in the mayor's office with two teenage girls that were victims of a human trafficking network. So there is no question of whether he did it or not. He openly said that he did that thing in the mayor's office, and yet he got elected again. Now
Okay,
another one.
so
Let me tell
yeah,
you, because we have another one. Hold your
yeah.
breath. We have Bogdan Davidescu, who was actually convicted for child pornography. A victim, one of his victims, brought him to court because he was blackmailing her with the recordings of him raping her while she was 14. And interestingly enough, the Romanian justice system did not convicted him for having sexual intercourse while he was 43 and the girl was 14 years old, but he got only convicted for the fact that he was blackmailing her. So they got him with a charge of child pornography. Okay, and the third one, I talked to you about him, Traian Ogurău, that actually recorded himself while he kept his daughter on her knees, face to the wall and arms up in the air, naked, and had her begging for his forgiveness. And he got elected again. This is the story. I mean, we can elaborate from here. Please, you have the
yeah. So like my first question, like starting from the beginning, like the first mayor that got reelected in this small town you described, you said, if I understood correctly, that there were 14 or whatever, like teenagers, two teenage girls that were pimped out to him by someone related to the trafficking procedure, because these two victims, they were not only victims of him, like him raping them, whatever, but also victims of the trafficking people networks, right? So he admitted that this happened, and what followed? I mean,
nothing.
okay, so why was he asked? Like, I mean, who?
He was a witness. So he was a witness, and I think that maybe the DA got some sort of deal with him, saying that, okay, if you come as a witness in this trial, you will not get convicted because it is.
Yeah, I understand that he might have, cut some sort of a deal with whatever the prosecutor or the court or something like that. Okay, I understand, but still, it was revealed that he abused two teenage girls in his office, right? If I understood correctly, or is it the other guy?
No, this one
okay,
in his
right,
office.
Okay, so it's the other guy, right? So anyway, he abused them, and you say, like, you explained it as if nothing had happened afterwards. So has it really been no reaction on the part of the, I don't know, of the opposition, for example? I mean, I don't know what party this person belonged to, but wouldn't anyone try and use that as a convenient leverage to discredit their opponents and say that, look, I mean, they've got people like this in their ranks and they are running for mayors and so on and so forth? That's one thing. And second thing is, okay, you are assuming, that's what I understand, that the public opinion, particularly those that were electing him, that they knew about this. They were perfectly aware of what's been going on before the election day. And despite having that knowledge, they still decided to go and vote for him. And the most basic question here is, what is the problem? I mean, what is wrong? Because something obviously is wrong. I mean, we're talking about huge demoralization. If we have a man, abusing victims of trafficking, plus, they're, raping them and so on and so forth, it's a very serious thing. I mean, regardless of what the attitude of the society is, it's a very serious crime under any penal code that I've ever come across.
Well, I've been thinking all day long, and I've been thinking for the past 2 weeks, what is wrong with us? And the thing that came to my mind was a horrible story, a personal one. I was visiting some relatives in the countryside in Romania some years ago, and they were telling me sincerely and honestly believing that. So they were telling me that an 8-year-old girl was luring the minister into temptation. And I was shocked, and I said, man, you are crazy. I mean, you have to be out of your mind to discuss about how morally depraved and how morally bankrupt an 8-year-old girl could be to lure into temptation the minister. But this is the deeply rooted cultural and mentality in Romania. I mean, it has very deep roots. We have to study to pass our baccalaureate exam, the final exam after you graduate high school. We have the French system here, and you have to pass this final exam. So we have to study as a mandatory reading a novel by a famous writer, Liviu Rebreanu, who perfectly describes the rural universe of Romania, because Romania also was a rural country for most of its history, and I think only now we have a higher percentage of people, but not things are not very different. For a long period of time, people living on the rural area were their percentage was much higher than the ones living in cities. So we were a rural society, and what he describes, this author there, is an incredible abuse against women who are seen as sex objects and labor force, but not much has changed. And why? I don't know. One of my friends said, look, the communist patriarchy was replaced by the capitalist patriarchy. No matter the economic system, the gender inequality and gender-based violence remain the same. That may be.
Yeah, but that's
many causes, because I outlined it in my mind that I wanted to share it with you and our viewers. First of all, communists have this very narrow idea that if you give women the right to vote and the right to work, and if you make sure that they work in a factory and that they have jobs, gender-based violence is suddenly going to disappear, because we will all be comrades. And just like that, magically, when you enter the door of the factory, everybody will be equal, and the gender-based violence is simply going to disappear. And we had no discussion about the gender-based violence. Feminism was banned, and it was considered a bourgeois ideology, even though our first important feminist in the 19th century was Sofia Nadezhde, who was a Marxist. But unfortunately, feminism was cast aside as a bourgeois ideology. We had no discussion about the rampant domestic violence that was happening in Romania, and we had state violence against women, because in 1966, when that criminal law and toxic and extremely violent was passed, that was banning abortions, well, that placed women in a very vulnerable position, and it was state violence directed to women because they were subjected to sexual torture for the most part. I told you the humiliation that they had to endure, the fact that they were forced to stay in line and to get a mandatory checkup by a gynecologist who wanted to see if they are pregnant or not. I'm referring to the workers in factories, Romanian women working in factories. The fact that they were blackmailed when they got back early abortions and they were getting sick, the police was actually preventing the doctors to intervene to save their lives, because they wanted the women to say who did that to them, because they wanted to trace down the people who are still doing abortion and to put them in prison. They were bringing their children and saying, look, you're going to die, you're never going to see your children unless you tell us who did this to you, and you are going to die here bleeding to death. Can you imagine that? It was
Yeah,
a
okay.
level of state violence that nobody talks about, okay? Just some
Yeah,
feminists are talking
that's
about,
true.
because the elites, after 1989, the elites captured the mainstream narrative and they wept crocodile tears about how difficult it was for them, and especially the Orthodox Church. And the women had no platform place, or there was not a serious debate about what happened to them. And the fact that we didn't have that debate that was so necessary in the Romanian society made it possible for the Orthodox Church to come up with crazy ideas of banning abortions again, even though we have such a huge trauma. I mean, we had more than 10,000 women died because of back alley abortions, and nobody talks about it. We didn't have a debate. And after the communist era period ended, we had 3 decades of neoliberalism that placed us in a more vulnerable position. 40% of the people sexually exploited in the European Union are from Romania. So you see, women are vulnerable category. They are placed in a very dangerous situation in our country from the economic, political, and cultural point of view. And you cannot put your finger, well, this is why people elected this mayor. I gave you
But you see,
to see the bigger picture here.
No, absolutely, absolutely. The context is very important, and I think historically speaking, I'm not sure if you were trying to make that point, but it seems like you are describing Romania as exceptionally pathologically patriarchal, so to say, and that this pathological patriarchy, a very violent one, maybe to some extent related to the rural culture or to the culture in the rural areas of Romania, which were underdeveloped in many ways, that it somehow was preserved. And, you know, despite the systemic change after the Second World War, it was not in any way, if I understand, if I read correctly what you said, it wasn't really, there was no change. And I think that that is exceptional, because at least in you know, in the Soviet Union, in Bulgaria, in Poland, in Yugoslavia, the women have definitely benefited from the changes. And it's not only about the question of them going to work and being able to work, but it's also a question, despite, of course, the general patriarchal model, but there were many benefits, like extension of the maternity leave, like paid maternity leave, you know, a lot of infrastructure regarding like kindergartens or preschools or you know, that the childcare, basically institutional childcare, was developed to an extent that it definitely made the general burden in terms of reproductive activities for women smaller. So they also benefited from the fact that, you know, abortions were free and available, and you know, obviously in Romania things were different. And then when you're saying about communists who think that feminism or that whatever, like sort of changing the system in terms of the economic mechanisms is going to magically solve the problem, I'm not sure whom you're referring to. I mean, I know there are Marxist groups around the world who do kind of, who do have this idea or share this idea that feminism is a bourgeois ideology, I would say that it depends what we actually.
I wanna say something here. Not the communists in general. The communists in Romania thought that,
Yeah.
okay, let's give them jobs and problem solved. And everything that they gained, because they gained a lot. I mean, we are the countries in European Union that has more women on STEM. I mean, science like mathematics, computer science, and so on and so forth. The percentage is higher than in Netherlands or other Western countries. So of course they benefited, but unfortunately, and the tragedy is that all the gains that they had was somehow downplayed and destroyed by this policy and this state violence against them that came with the 1966 law banning abortions. And
Right.
it's because it was not just banning abortions. They were extremely devious in carrying on their plans in controlling women's uteruses. Okay, so
Yeah,
it
okay,
was.
so it's obviously there is some obsession that I don't understand where it actually stems from. I mean, it is not clear to me. But the entire situation with the entire situation that you describe is for me, well, in a way, it's familiar because, in a way, partially, very partially, it also exists in Poland. In a way that, for example, we would have priests, okay, or bishops who would react to scandals that that had surfaced in the media about again, bishops or priests being child molesters, and they would say that it's the children's fault because they somehow dragged the bishops and the priests and whatever other functionaries of the Catholic Church into bed, and that's because they received bad upbringing at home, and this is in turn because there's LGBT ideology and all the rest of it, right? So yeah, okay, we have this element, but it's extremely pathological. I mean, it's like it doesn't come from the society, okay? It comes, or it's not like how the majority of the population reasons. It's how particular groups that are involved in certain processes, like the Catholic Church and child abuse. This is where this sort of explanation happens, okay? Not like it's not the popular approach to the entire phenomenon. Of course, on the other hand, there's this explanation. I would say that priests they don't live in a vacuum, right? They are also part of society. So in general, it does speak to the fact that the society seems to have a problem, a social, cultural, moral, ethical, if you like, problem, and that's true. But then, the question here is, let's not focus maybe on the first guy exclusively. It's like all the three of them, they are sex offenders and they got elected. Now, if it had turned out right before the elections that they are, for example, they had robbed the bank, or that they are gay people, or something like that, what would prevent people potentially from voting for them? Because
Being gay, I think being gay is worse than raping women. I mean, when you rape women, you are somehow a hero. And let me explain about another case that we had in Romania, where it was a famous one, a horrific rape that occurred, a gang rape. 7 young men raped a girl, and the villagers, the ones that, the villagers where those rapists came from, actually protested and said, look, they are just young boys, their lives are going to be destroyed. She's just a depraved woman. You don't have to care about her. And they actually teamed up and they protested to defend the rapists.
Okay, yeah. But there's got to be an explanation for that. I mean, why are people so prone to defend, male criminals? I mean, there's got to be something about it. And I just, I understand and I'm familiar with, the notion of patriarchy and all the problems that it can produce and that the women have to endure and so on and so forth. Yet I just don't buy that it's just simple patriarchy. I mean, there's got to be something
Yes,
more about it,
it
because
is.
I mean, it's still, it's not Saudi Arabia here, okay? Nor neither it is in Romania, okay? So it seems to me, and it's also like rape in Romanian. I mean, I'm not an expert in Romanian law, but I'm absolutely 100% sure that rape is a crime that is prosecuted, and that you can be convicted for years of jail.
Yes, it is. And this is why I gave you the historical context, because it is so easy to say, well, it is just patriarchy, but poverty, lack of education, the fact that we didn't have a debate about the state violence against women during communist time, about what a trauma it was to have abortions banned in Romania. Okay, the fact that we didn't have the space to debate these things, and somehow they are always put aside. Okay, this is not important. We have to focus on other topics. And this is what created this situation, because this type of violence is not addressed. I mean, people are ripping their clothes off if they hear you are a gay person, but if you're a rapist, well, maybe she was provoking him. I mean, let me give you another horrifying statistics. The gender based violence index at the European Union. They conduct researches like that from time to time. And they established that in Romania, 55% of the population thinks that there are circumstances where rape is acceptable. The only
What
good news, and I
circumstances?
want to close this horrific chapter, is that the law I've been talking to you about, that was initiated by a Union Save Romania PM that wanted to raise the punishments and to make the punishment harsher for sex offenders, was initially attacked by the government and the Constitutional Court, but the Constitutional Court says the law is okay. So we have
Yeah,
some
okay.
success.
Okay,
But
still,
we
but
are now only finally seeing some NGOs, some feminist PMs that are tackling the issues. The fight has been going on for 30 decades, but I feel that only now we are seeing some small steps in the direction of progress, and still it's not enough. Because when
yeah,
you have
I'm
this
sure it
level of
isn't.
poverty, I mean,
Also, I have to say that I don't quite believe in the efficiency. I mean, maybe it's going to work in Romania, and fingers crossed. I mean, I hope it does. But I don't really believe in the efficiency of the NGO work regarding these things, because this is not a non-governmental work. This is a governmental work. I mean, this is what government has to do in order to first first and foremost, of course, we need proper law. Second, we need proper training of social security officers, police officers, you know, and NGOs aren't going to do that. I mean, you need either local authorities or central authorities to step in and organize programs for that. And then, the question of the debate, I think it's crucial. I mean, how are you going to make people even think about it if you don't debate the question? And here the main problem seems to be the world of the media. Like how do the media approach this sort of things? I mean, if you get sex offenders elected, then I would imagine that in the media it would be a scandal, like one scandal after another. One horrified author after another horrified columnist, and so on and so forth. Yet nothing like that happens. So at the same time, you say it's been like that for what, 3 decades or even more, maybe, because including the period before 1989. So when you say that it's the first changes somewhere, the light in the tunnel seems to be there. What are the changes? Like, where are they? I mean, people still elect sex offenders, convicted sex offenders or alleged sex offenders, or unconvicted but admitted to what they've done, as mayors so where are these steps forward? Where are they manifesting themselves and how?
Well, I told you that the Constitutional Court said that the law is okay, so the government has no reason to attack it. And we have MPs actually that are very sensitive to the question of gender-based violence, and this is a first for Romania.
Mhm.
And we also have more women in power position that are able to spread the message. And look, we are talking about it. Something like that would have been unnoticed, would have been completely ignored some say a decade ago, or even
Mm.
thought to be something normal. Okay,
Mhm.
so you have to see that by comparison to how Romania looked like 15 years ago, this is progress. But
Okay.
I want to talk to you briefly about the second topic, and then we'll move to Bulgaria because we have plenty to talk about.
Right, right.
As I told you on a different occasion, Romanians unfortunately elect a French mayor of Timișoara. This is where the city where the revolution started. That is a symbolic city for Romania. And they elected a German mayor. We have a French citizen, Clotilde Dagman, the French woman that got elected in one district of Romanian of Bucharest, and that's very important. We have the president, Klaus Johannes, who is German, and Romanians are bragging about it, but underneath, you have to understand that we are not, it is not multiculturalism, it is self-colonization. We think that the Westerners are superior to us, and we think that we have several ethnic minorities, and there are those we consider superior, that is the French, the Germans, the British, I mean, the ex-colonial powers are okay for us, but for some reason the Roma are not. They are reason for our contempt. And there are those who we fear, the Hungarians we fear that they are going to take the western part of our country and uh, they are going to rob us. And then they are going to take the western part of our country, and we have these fantasies with the Hungarians coming and taking that back. So it's a deeply rooted pathology here in Romania, and we have xenophobic tendencies. We do not consider Hungarians to be, I don't know, inferior, and yet we fear them. So this is basically the situation. If somebody would say that Romania is the multicultural advanced nation, I would say we are a people, but I don't think so. I don't think that we are a nation. I mean, if you are a nation, you have to have some common dreams, projects, ideals, and to think of yourself as a citizen, and you should be also proud that we have Roma mayors, but you don't see the same type of enthusiasm when a Roma mayor is elected. So let's not get carried away with this multiculturalism in Romania.
Yeah, okay. Like I would never personally, I don't know much about minorities in Romania, but I would never probably call Romania a multicultural society. I mean, not now, for sure, because I've heard from you and also from from the media about all kinds of problems that occur on the border, let's say, between the Romanian ethnicity and the Roma ethnicity, and about the ongoing problem. Okay, in this respect, we also have that in Bulgaria. So it's a very serious problem. I think it really deserves a lot of effort if it's ever going to be solved in any way. And again, this shouldn't be the work. It shouldn't be done by NGOs. I mean, it's great that NGOs are doing something, but it's a far cry from what we actually need in order to, you know, actually install any kind of order in terms of Roma Bulgarian, Roma Romanian relations, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't understand why would anyone be actually cheering on the occasion of having elected a mayor with a German background or French background. Like for me, as a person who has serious attitude towards politics, the question would be, what is their record? I mean, I personally, as an internationalist, by the way, I don't care whether they're German or Polish or Jewish or Russian or whatever. I want to know what's their record. They have been elected, and what platform did they run on? That's because if they are German or French or Western, okay, in whatever way, and they succumb to the same culture, which is the one that we discussed in the previous part of the program. I mean, part of that culture, which is related to patriarchy and violence against women. But then there's also political culture, which is corrupt on all levels you can imagine, and so on and so forth, right? So if they are from the West, and they live and function in the circumstances that we have in Romania or in Eastern Europe in general, then what's the difference? What is there to cheer about?
Well, you know what would have been interesting if some Russian ethnic would gain the elections. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, but you see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. There's something I just don't understand here, and I would like to be able somehow to find the question, to penetrate the problem. Because look, we've got sex offenders who were elected as mayors. Had it been anything else, like for example, it would have had turned out that they are gay people. You said it yourself. They probably wouldn't have been elected because that would have been a major scandal that gay people are running for mayors in some Romanian towns. But beating up or raping women, that's all right. Then, here, French people, German people elected as mayors, that's fantastic, great. Whatever they think of politics, regardless of their agenda, regardless of their platform, yeah, great. But had it been a Russian one, even with a perfect platform, or with a fantastic record, probably they would have been voted out. This is not normal. I mean, I'm sorry. It's like, I hate to use that word, but it's like something is out of control here, out of cognitive control, because, people with some sort of collective cognitive apparatus, fully functional, they just don't do that. So I accept, the kind of explanation that I've heard many times about such severe problems in Bulgaria in particular, that people live in constant fear, and, their collective consciousness is distorted in all kinds of ways. And I find it like to be one explanation, but I guess there's got to be many more, and it's getting more and more absurd every time. By the way, when we speak about the West, the superiority of the West, the superiority of the United States of America, and all that actually has been the most important kind of propagandistic paradigm for the last, I don't know, 3 decades, right? Or even more than that, because we heard that already in the 80s in Poland, that, everything in the West is great, everything in the West is fantastic. And, our immigrants who went there and then came back and were explaining about how colorful their shops are, how many, goods they have there, and so on and so forth. Only they never spoke, when they came back, they never spoke about things like exploitation or that kind of stuff, which is typical for capitalist countries. So, they were the best, they were the model, they were, the ideal. But suddenly now, it's not like that anymore, because, the West, apart from all these great things, that we have been talking about for the last 30 years, it's also, the LGBT ideology, right? It's also human rights. It's also all kinds of things which the Polish right-wingers are extremely uncomfortable with. So the West is not good anymore. And what they're actually doing is they are replicating, in a very poor manner, of course, but they are replicating the propaganda from before 1989, when they said that the West was rotten and so on and so forth. Yet they had a foundation.
But for different reasons, because
Yes,
before
different reasons,
1989 it was exploitation, and now they are morally bankrupt because who would have thought that they have a transgender women elected at the vice
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah. So you know, it's
Unacceptable, and they are going to come and destroy our national and spiritual well-being.
absolutely. And you know, until today, I've been asking that question many times. I want to understand. I want someone to sit right in front of me across the desk and to explain, like it could be a right winger, whatever, someone who is very much into this LGBT ideology, as they like to call it, destroying families. I mean, how is this technically happening? I want to know. Like, are the LGBT people invading homes of whatever Catholic heterosexual families, and I don't know, they are beating them up violently, somehow converting them into homosexuals or whatever? I don't know. I just don't understand that. And you know, this perception that I don't know, if children learn at school that there is something like homosexuality, then they will all become homosexual. That's such nonsense that it's even difficult to discuss, you know, in any rational in any rational way. So look, it's now no one is good in Poland. Obviously, you're still in the phase where the West is superior, the West is fantastic, and so on and so forth. But like once probably the kind of the propaganda against the LGBT, the kind of ultra conservatism, and so on and so forth, when it gains even more you know, impetus and momentum, then probably it'll turn out the same. Like in Romania, that you're going to have this contradiction. On the one hand, they would like to be like the West because the West is great, and the West had this whatever, has this great past, and I don't know what their arguments could be, but the West is fantastic just a priori. And then they're going to have this that okay, the West is fantastic, but the West is also actually enforcing, or maybe, well, enforcing is not the right word, but it's sort of coming up with ideas that we are afraid of because they are related to, for example, people's sexuality and so on and so on. So we'll see how it's going to pan out in Romania. I think you're going to have a lot of humoristic accents.
Oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. So please, Ben, in the second part of our show, I wanted to discuss with you the situation in Bulgaria, because to me, it is simply unbelievable. I mean, let me tell you something. When I first saw your prime minister, honestly, without knowing anything about him, my first thought was, he looks like a bodyguard, and it turns out that he was actually. And unfortunately, my intuition was correct. Not that bodyguards should not be allowed to become presidents, but he was the bodyguard of the ex-president, so he was not in an underprivileged position when he took the power. The second thing is that from the discussions that I had with other people protesting in Bulgaria, I never would have imagined that things are so bad. And in a perverse way, it made me feel better about Romania, because these horror stories that I'm telling you about are from the rural area. At least in the cities and at the top levels of our power, things at least seem to be a little bit more, I don't know, still a little different to say.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it's different.
And
Although Bulgaria and
for
Romania.
our viewers, I mean, I think it's pretty shocking to find out that this individual basically destroyed that country, and he is ruling as a mobster because he got recently photographed naked in his bed, and he had near his bed piles of money, of euros, a gun, and gold. I mean, this is like a cheap Italian movie. It is
Not Italian,
unbelievable.
Japanese.
And the Westerners, and nobody's talking even in our mainstream press. This is happening like in our backyard. I mean, we are so close. You are our neighbors. And yet nobody seems to be interested in what is going on there.
Yeah,
So
look, there are so many aspects here that I don't know where to start, really. First, I want to say that your instincts are absolutely correct. I mean, you see the guy, I mean, I am talking about Boyko Borisov, the prime minister of Bulgaria, and you can see he's a gangster. I mean, it doesn't really take a lot of, I don't know, knowledge, okay, of any kind. You don't have to be a professor in sociology or anything like that to just look at him and say that this guy's a mobster. And he has been a mobster ever since. Like in the past, before 1989, and in the beginning of the 90s, he was the bodyguard of the former dictator Todor Zhivkov, who ruled since early 60s in Bulgaria until 1989. And his career is not very surprising, provided the model of the transition of the capitalist restoration in Bulgaria, which was very similar to the one in Russia, where the secret services, together with all other enforcement agencies, they overruled the, as we like to call it, partocracy, which is like the top people at the party. Okay. And since they managed to overrule them, they started installing their own system, which inevitably led, like, it's a long story. I mean, I could speak for an hour about it, how it led to the development of the organized crime structures in Bulgaria, and how organized crime really became the soul of the transition. And now, it reaps a harvest in a way that until 1996, 1997, there was still some balance, okay, between the state apparatus and machinery, which was owned by the bureaucrats that were important people in the party before 1989, and the mobsters and the organized crime. Despite the spectacular killings in the center of Sofia and so on and so forth, despite that, we still had some balance, and that was only possible thanks to the fact that the governments after 1990 have not been forced to privatize as rampantly as in Poland or Hungary. I don't know about Romania. Yeah, okay. So we haven't had that, and we were able to maintain this balance. But this was very uncomfortable situation for the West, because they wanted to enter the Bulgarian market, and they wanted to eliminate the industry, or to take it over, or to basically do their job here. Like, not here, I'm in Poland, right there in Bulgaria. So that was very, very uncomfortable for them, and it was becoming uncomfortable also for the Russians, because Bulgaria was able to exercise some sovereignty in the 90s. I mean, not much, but some, and that was, as I said, it was uncomfortable for the West, and it was uncomfortable also for the Russian companies that were operating in Bulgaria, and they were, it was obvious that, it was just inherited from before 1989, because we had Soviet companies, so they became Russian companies, and because of the rampant corruption in the 90s in Russia, it also, there was no way that it wouldn't translate itself to rampant corruption in Bulgaria, or wherever these companies were operating in other cities. So what happened in the final aftermath in 1996 to 1997, we had what I like to call the first successful colorful revolution. In Europe, that happened in Bulgaria, and that was the beginning of the end. Then what happened is a right-wing government that privatized literally everything, killing, for example, the Bulgarian Airlines, one of the largest in the Soviet bloc, that were flying to South Africa, and to other continents and so on and so forth. They killed them within, like, I think 18 months or something like that. And now Bulgaria Air, which is owned by a mafia structure in Bulgaria, is has 3 or 4 planes, or maybe 6, something like that. So I'm just giving it as an example so that people can get an understanding of the size of the disaster that followed after the events of 1997. Everything was in absolute ruin. And in 2001, like in early 21st century, okay, I'm not gonna give dates exactly because my memory for dates is very bad. But in the early 2000, in the early years of the first decade of the 21st century, we had all kinds of, first we had this right-wing neoliberal privatizing everything government, and then it didn't work, so we elected the son of the former king of Bulgaria as a prime minister, who actually continued these policies. Then, and we had these, people that were going to come and save us. Like we really sort of started developing this sort of mindset that another Messiah is going to come and is going to save the situation, is going to turn our lives around somehow. And then at one moment, Boyko Borisov also became such a hope, because he was promising that he's going to seriously take on the organized crime, because he's a general, because he has been educated as a policeman. And after so many disasters and after such a major downgrade, I mean, people just bought that. And he used this opportunity when he was elected, when he formed the party and he was elected for the first time. It was 15 years ago, if I remember correctly, to first rule with other parties and then to basically take everything for himself. And of course, he represents one of the wings of the Bulgarian oligarchy, one of the wings of the Bulgarian organized crime. And in fact, formally speaking, his rule is, again, formally, technically, is an effect of how people voted in, parliamentary elections and so on and so forth. But if you look at it as a process, his rule is really, qualitatively speaking, an effect of years and years of internal struggles inside the Bulgarian oligarchy that developed in the 90s, and the fact that his group, his organized crime, his gang, overruled the other. They, outsmarted them, and they won the internal, civic war, if you like. So this is the fact. So like, these are the real dynamics, okay, behind the process of transition. And to my mind, Boyko Borisov is very symbolic, because I think the Bulgarian transition started as some kind of a democratic farce. Like it was some sort of idea that this is democratic, but it was really kind of, it was a joke. It was like there was no democracy. No one really understood what are we actually talking about. The first time people were able to vote freely, completely freely, they still voted for the so-called old communists, right? And there was like completely no understanding of all these notions of like freedom, civic liberties, and all the rest of it, right? So it was really a joke. And now it's another joke, only this time it's not a democratic joke, it's an authoritarian joke. Because of course, as a gangster who needs to rule over the clans, okay, the oligarchic clans that sort of are the essence of the Bulgarian economic and political life, then sometimes he has to resort to authoritarian methods, because otherwise he will just not be able to contain them. And this is the situation. That's what we have. And the people are protesting now, have been protesting for almost 90 days. The protest started on July the 9th, if I remember correctly. And we're almost October the 9th. So it's going to be 3 months in literally a couple of days. And
I want to ask something, because you wrote an extensive piece on the situation in Bulgaria, and I remember that you said that the President Radev seems to be the only one who managed to somehow get to power through elections, and at the same time challenge this Boyko Borisov rule of mafia-style rule of the state.
Yeah, well, so that happened in 2016, and it's because he's a guy who perfectly fits the Bulgarian idea about honest man. Like, he's an ex-army general. He is he was He was the guy at the top of the Bulgarian Air Force. I don't know. They probably have 2 or 3 planes as well. But anyway, in the past, the Bulgarian army used to be a huge one. I mean, we had more tanks than Greece and Turkey together, right? So like in the past, and he's like a person that remembers the past very well. Like he's 50 years old or something like that. So he also is a person that never had to do with politics. And he was supported by the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which is the opposition party to the Borisov one and to his government. But he doesn't come from that party. I mean, he's not a member of that party. And he came with this idea that things have to be honest, things have to be transparent, things have to be moral, and at the same time, he also had a very reasonable geopolitical, so to say, position. I mean, he did not share, or he was actually confronting even the kind of anti-Russian hysteria that was developing in the world, that had been developing since, I don't know, a couple of years by then, right? By 2016. And that scored him a lot of points because Bulgaria, like, I don't know which country I could compare it to, maybe to Belarus, by the way, is like the societies there, they feel some sort of genuine brotherhood, okay, with the Russian nation society, whatever you want to call it. So it really, served him well, and people at the time were already very tired with Boyko Borisov because he's been there for, I don't know, a decade by then or something like this. And he's been there, I mean, in power. And yeah, he received a lot of votes, and people were hoping that he's actually even maybe going to form a party. And even I was hoping that he's going to form a party that is maybe going to go into coalition with the Bulgarian Socialist Party. But at the same time, I'm not one of those who will. I do feel that he probably is the closest person to the kind of imaginary, honest politician and so on and so forth. I think, yeah, like he's not corrupt, obviously. Or at least there's no evidence of that.
And yet, Boyko Borisov sent the DAs and the police to investigate some of the employers and some of the allies of the president.
Yeah, well, we don't know whether he sent it. Yeah. We don't know whether he actually has given the order. Maybe it's the other guy that I'm talking about in the article, Delian Pevsky, who is one of the most powerful people in Bulgaria at the moment. And his party in general is, in theory, I should say, is in opposition to the one of Boyko Borisov, but it's it's a beggar's belief to sort of think that they are real enemies. I mean, these people work together. And so I don't know whether it's the one guy or the other guy. One thing is certain, that it's not how things work in Bulgaria. I mean, this kind of thing, because the pretext was that an SMS was sent and somehow captured by the Secret Service or something, or the police. I don't know. I mean, I don't remember the exact institutional details, but an SMS was sent to one of the closest advisors of Radev, where someone would have asked whether it would be possible to get some support for someone becoming an ambassador somewhere. And then the guy would reply something along the lines of, okay, we'll see. Okay, so while there might be some corruption involved, really, I mean, this is not how things work in Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, we've got one corruption scandal after another, and no one is investigating it, inspecting it. Nothing happens. Okay, and yet here, someone sends an SMS like this, and the prosecution uses the fully hard-armored police to storm, to raid the president's office. Like, have you ever heard about anything like that in a European country? So it's a demonstration of how detached these people are from reality, like what they are doing. They really detach themselves from any kind of understanding of how politics work, and they don't care, and quite justifiably they don't care, because no one is holding them accountable for anything. Because, the Bulgarian people, okay, they can't really do much. I mean, they're doing the best they can. It's a desperate, move. Like 90 days, on the streets massively every day. Well, that's a lot. Okay. Now, the European Union, they know exactly how this, what the situation is like on the ground in Bulgaria. They know perfectly well how the European funds are stolen, how the corruption mechanisms involved, what the corruption mechanisms involved into this theft of European funds looks like. They know everything. Or if they don't know, they can
Yes,
go
they
ahead and
don't
read
know
our
they
articles.
long about Belarus and about what is
Yeah.
happening there. Well, what's happening in Bulgaria goes unnoticed, and this is simply unbelievable because
Absolutely.
I was not aware that things are so bad, because I'm thinking now that maybe some other force, maybe the European Union, maybe the US, maybe the Russians, or somebody is trying to take down Borisov, because there is a very interesting intrigue here that an escort actually photographed Borisov while sleeping, and she also photographed the drawer next to his bed filled with money, and he had gold, and he had there a gun.
Yeah.
And I think this sort of thing could not be the doing of Radev, because I think he is not the kind of person to engage, from what you're saying, in this type of intrigues. The clans, I think, are with Borisov because they want to keep the status quo. So the only possible explanation for this cheap porn, soft porn episode in Bulgarian politics would be that some foreign nation state is trying to intervene.
No, that's
First of all, and second of all, the viewers have to know, and I urge them to read the articles, the article that I translated. Some recordings were leaked to the press, and the way Borisov is talking is just, I mean, it's so representative of who who the guy is, and how Bulgaria is being run at the moment.
absolutely. But I also want to add a couple of things here because, well, first, obviously, Radev has not sent anyone any escort or anything. It's like one thing is that he doesn't seem to be that kind of person. But second is that he doesn't have any influence. Like, whom is he going to use? Like Borisov controls the entire state apparatus, including the Secret Service and everything else. Okay, so Radev doesn't really have the possibility to do that. And obviously, like this person, this woman that came to Borisov's house and made the photographs, and including him naked on his bed, and the stacks of money and the pistol and the gold and all the rest of it, right? Obviously, she must have had some extra strong backing, because had it been, I think I've even written that in the article, had it been any random escort girl, okay, that would have gone there and would have liked to extort him, for example, okay, blackmailing him that she's going to reveal something, she would have been, dead 1,000 times, okay? Like they wouldn't be able to, whatever, trace their DNA or anyone she had ever come across in their life. So it's obviously something that, I don't have any proof, okay? Like I cannot prove the fact that it's foreign meddling. And I don't think someone is necessarily trying to take Borisov down. I think someone is maybe trying to pull his ears, like in a way to just make sure that he actually obeys, because all kinds of interesting things could happen to him, okay? And yeah, we can speculate whether it's Americans, Russians, or whoever. I think it could have, it might have to do with the pipeline, okay, that's going to go through Turkey, that was going to go through Bulgaria, but then John McCain came in 2000 and whatever year it was, 16, 17, I can't remember exactly, somewhere around there, and said, no, you can't have that pipe, so it's going to go through Turkey, but then a small part of it, small segment is going to go through Bulgaria. And then, of course, there's a pressure from Russia that Bulgaria allows that. There's a pressure from America that Bulgaria doesn't allow that. So yeah, I mean, it's possible that someone, is playing tricks to Borisov in order to sort of discipline him. I don't know. I personally, of course, I don't feel sorry for that guy, but I wouldn't like to be in his shoes. To make such a choice now, like between whether you're going to serve or whether you're going to like to make the choice between the Russians and the Americans, provided the entire global geopolitical situation. I think it's a very tough choice, and I don't know how he's going to defend himself. And also, he's involved in all kinds of criminal activities. I mean, he's a regular gangster. Okay, he traffics people, traffics drug. I don't have no one has caught him red-handed. But I mean, there's been so many stories, okay, in the press and like wherever in the international media about how he's making, his gangster, how he's organizing his gangster activities together with Erdogan's son, and it's like there's plenty of it. I mean, you can just look it up in Google if you like. So so that's one thing. And the second thing the second point I want to make, and I think it's extremely important for our viewers to consume that idea, and maybe not only for our viewers, but in general for people in Bulgaria, I think the situation, because you said, Maria, you were not expecting the situation is so bad, and the situation is even worse. I mean, this is just a humoristic outburst. Like, this is just a series of coincidences that make it look like it's a comedy of mistakes. And that's, of course, that's funny to an extent, and that's pathetic at the same time. But the situation is absolutely dramatic. I mean, the demographic disaster. Well, we've been when I departed from Bulgaria in 1994, we were about the population of Bulgaria was about 9,500,000 people. Okay, now it's less than 7 million. And I don't know anyone in Bulgaria, and I don't know anyone who would not know someone who has family or friends abroad. So 1/3 of the population is lost without, any war or anything like that. Okay. Second, there's virtually no economy, no industry. The agriculture, I mentioned that in the introduction, is virtually controlled by a handful, I think 5 or 6 families, and the 5 or 6 families, they actually consume 85, if I remember correctly, % of all the subsidies that the European Union provides to Bulgaria for agriculture, and everybody knows that again in the European Union. The infrastructure is falling apart. The education and the healthcare system are in absolute decay. The province is almost uninhabited. The illiteracy is growing in the Roma population, and it really looks like we're at the end. I mean, we're at the end of the story about the modern Bulgarian statehood, which began 140 something years ago, and now it seems to approaching its conclusion. Because honestly, and I've asked these questions in the introduction, like, is there a way out? And I don't know. I mean, obviously, this mass movement that we observe now on the streets of Sofia, this is our last hope. I mean, I just don't see what else could possibly happen. I just don't see what other things could the Bulgarian population do at the moment. I mean, of course, the protests could get a bit more violent maybe at some point. Okay. But then, if nothing changes under the pressure of these protests, and it doesn't seem like much is going to change, because in the beginning, in July, in the first days, weeks of the protest, Boyko Borisov was absolutely, shocked, stunned, and in panic that it was happening. And then, he had these discussions with, the American ambassador or whatever, whom obviously have given him the green light and told him not to worry and to just, wait until the whole thing dissolves. The social mobilization. And he got somehow reassured, okay, that he doesn't have to step down. And again, I don't know whether it was the American ambassador, but obviously the interference from the side of the American embassy was obvious. Like, even if you look up their press releases on the website, I mean, of the Bulgarian or the American embassy in Sofia. Yeah, it's all pretty pessimistic. And my opinion is that, and I think I told that a couple of programs ago, that it seems that the model installed in Bulgaria has run out of any possibility for further reproduction. I mean, they just can't do that anymore because of many reasons, but the basic one being there's nothing to steal anymore. They've stolen everything that the People's Republic has produced from 1944 to 1989. They've stolen some European funds. Now the funding is going to get less, and there's nothing to steal anymore. Okay, and they don't know how to produce. They don't know how to do anything else in stealing because this is the only economic culture that developed among the elites from 1989 onwards. So if they don't step down, if Borisov doesn't step down, I think that's gonna be the beginning of we can already see that. In fact, it's going to be strengthening, maybe not the beginning. It's going to be strengthening of the process of forming an authoritarian Bonapartist regime in Bulgaria. That, unfortunately, is probably going to enjoy the blessing of the European elites, like it has been for the last 15 years. No one has ever wagged a finger at Borisov in the European Union. I don't know what Borisov how Borisov is an asset for Merkel, for Verhofstadt, for Juncker. I don't know. But obviously, there is some relationship between Borisov and the oligarchic clan behind him and the European leaders, if they tolerate him and if they have been tolerating him for such a long period of time. And even now, when people in Bulgaria is happening essentially pretty much the same thing as in Belarus in terms of the quality of the postulates, the social movement, it's the same thing. A gangster at the top, ruining the country, ruining the society, ruining the economy, rampant poverty everywhere, no opposition, basically virtually no opposition media, okay? And the European Union is just, eyes wide shut. That's it, right? So now on the 5th of October, they're going to have a hearing in the European Parliament. Now, personally, and maybe that's the last accent in this, lengthy monologue. It's look, I don't really have a lot of hope that anyone is going to support the Bulgarian protests. I mean, in terms of any important geopolitical factor, I just don't see who would benefit from it. Like, we haven't really made a lot of friends. Like, the Bulgarian nation, the Bulgarian left, the Bulgarian opposition, we have not really, we're not really a political force that can now confront this corrupt oligarchic regime. And that's why I'm very pessimistic, very hopeful at the same time. I mean, I really, really hope something changes, something happens, and perhaps something unexpected would happen or will happen. But in order for anything to change, we need to see a force that is alternative to Borisov and that would carry out a completely different sort of politics. And I just don't see such structure in Bulgarian politics.
Well, let's hope that something like that would happen. And who knows? I mean, I don't think that some 5 months ago you would have expected Bulgarians to be in the streets for 90 days. So who knows? Maybe there is room for hope here. So thank you. We've been talking a lot. Hope our viewers found our discussion interesting, and see you again next week.
See you.